There once was a man named Don Cupid. He passed away earlier this year. He lived from the 22nd of May, 1934, until the 18th of January, 2025. I don't know much about him. A few years ago, when we were all stuck inside, the YouTube algorithm served up to me, as I'm sure it served up to plenty of other people, the 1984 BBC documentary series, The Sea of Faith. Apparently it caused quite a stir when it first aired, because that's what all the retrospective news and blog articles about the Sea of Faith always mention. Always more than a fair bit of negativity from the public. I'm sure that Cupid was perfectly aware that that was what would have happened when he first set out putting the production together and writing the book of the same name. To speak about faith outside of an insular and religious arena, to give as much space to the atheists as to the believers, because they deserve it, is to offend half the world with one breath, the other half with the next. The spray of the sea against the bow as one sails willingly into the tumultuous waters. Then was then, and now is now. While the Sea of Faith was originally broadcast on one of the largest television networks with broad-based viewership in Britain, I wager that most people nowadays who not only find the Sea of Faith, but who also stick around to watch it and then leave YouTube comments afterwards, are the kinds of people more likely to be positive in their reaction. Not that I discount these positive reactions, mind you, but I'd simply like to say that I couldn't rightly compare the reactions of British television viewers in 1984 who were willing to write to the BBC without mentioning shifts in demographics, media consumption habits, and other things like that. Speaking of the book, I bought it on a whim a while later, after I had moved on from my time with the documentary. One part of me suspected that the book would contain slightly expanded versions of the arguments found in the show, and so I assumed that it would be more like a pleasant, accompanying reader for the individual who first found the show compelling and who then wanted a bit more beyond it. Another part of me hoped, with some amount of doubt, that the book would also contain arguments and ideas that were never included in the contents of the show for a lack of airtime, time, budget, appropriateness, or otherwise. Well, in the end, I think that to read The Sea of Faith after having first seen the documentary is to read A Midsummer Night's Dream after having first seen a production of the play. The book is often, indeed, a play-by-play of the documentary. Argumentative structures are mostly the same. Some of the most memorable one-liners read aloud by Cupid, if I may call them that, are found in the text one-to-one, and, to me, I think that much of Cupid's wordplay works well in both the spoken and written form. The book is also something that Cupid seems to have had more latitude in cramming full of ideas. It is undoubtedly distinct from the show, full of new arguments and ideas, and yet these new arguments and ideas do not color the book in such a way so as to make it not as digestible as the thing that was crafted for Britain's mass media television audience. It is very much just as digestible, and perhaps even more understandable in a sense, because with the book, at least one does not have the option of giving themselves over to the sights and sounds of the audiovisual, all while also trying to digest what Cupid meant when he says,
Kierkegaard sees that religious belief is not a matter of accepting reassuring information about how things are up there. It's a challenge to commit yourself to a way of life. Faith is an act of pure freedom by which we choose ourselves, choose our path in life.
And then turns away from the camera to walk towards a fork in a forested pathway somewhere in Denmark. But, I am aware that I am expressing words which might be construed as appreciation for what someone might essentially characterize as something close to the common Western man's guide to Western societal, religious, and spiritual trends from the medieval to the modern. That is, something pedestrian, something for the mass market, and I too would characterize the Sea of Faith as such. But only in the same way that someone could characterize either or as a few connected and unconnected correspondences full of profundity and all that about aesthetics and the ethical, all compiled together for publishing by a man who happened to come upon these correspondences after having bought an escritoire that he lusted over for a good long while. That is, I think that I give much latitude to works which feel as if they are the result of people sincerely bearing some part of themselves to the outside world in an edifying and self-edifying way. Sometimes I feel as if I give too much latitude for these sorts of things. Sometimes I feel as if I'm not critical and self-critical enough with regards to my enjoyment of things like the Sea of Faith. But with the Sea of Faith, I think I am sure. If I obsessed over Don Cupid, the man who was Don Cupid, after I had watched this documentary, then I would have been ashamed. If I obsessed over the documentary more than I have done so far, then again I would be similarly ashamed. But now, and I suspect it will be the same for many other people before me, I am left with a passionate admiration for something beyond myself, and I often want to tell other people about it, but I must tell myself that this passionate admiration must remain detached, self-critical, and insular as much as possible. Faith is faith. Religion is religion. To subsume yourself over to a religion that you yourself created, to worship at the altar of an individual who you yourself deified. Well, these are things which we all do every waking moment of our lives, but the recognition of these practices as such is something to be occasionally done for good hygiene.